Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Today we are going to summarize the objections which have been raised against Ustaz Javed Ahmad Ghamidi regarding his view about what is lawful and what is not lawful, or in other words, what is halal and what is haram. The objection which has been leveled against him is that he regards only 5 things to be prohibited, and there are several other things which are found in the Quran and the Hadith which seemingly tell us that there are other things which are prohibited as well. But according to him, there are just 5 things which are prohibited. So we are going to take a look at this objection and also his view regarding these prohibited items and how he answers these objections. The first thing that he says in this regard, dear viewers, is that if we divide religion into its contents through a process in which we can relate all the directives which are given in religion, then we can identify 4 spheres. The first sphere is that of worship. So we have a whole bunch of directives related to the worship sphere in which people are related to the Almighty through various worship rituals. The second sphere is that of morals. So we have directives which relate to morals and ethics. The third sphere relates to a whole category which we can categorize as physical cleansing. And finally, the fourth category of the contents of religion is the category of edibles and what we eat in our diet, whether they are edibles or they are drinks. So these are the 4 categories of religion. Now, according to Ustaz Javed Ahmad Ghamidi, he says that the purpose of religion is purification of the soul. So all these 4 categories in which directives are given, if we look at the directives themselves, we'll find that the purpose of each of these directives is purification, it's self-purification. And this is something which has been mentioned very clearly in the Quran, not only after it was mentioned that we have been given innate guidance, after that even when we have been given this clue from the Almighty that as far as the prophets of God are concerned, when they come, their purpose also in giving us religion is to purify our souls. So regarding the verse which relates to our innate guidance, the Quranic words are وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا, which means, and the soul bears witness, and the perfection given to it, then God inspired it with its evil and its good, that he succeeded who purified it, and he failed who corrupted it. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. Then in the second instance, where it is mentioned that the purpose of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ bringing religion to his followers is also exactly the same, and that is to purify them. We, for example, can quote the Quranic verse, هُوَ الَّذِي بَعَثَ فِي الْأُمِّيِّينَ رَسُولًا مِّنْهُمْ يَتْلُو عَلَيْهِمْ آيَاتِهِ وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ. It is he who has sent among the unlettered a messenger from amongst themselves, who recites out to them his verses and purifies them. And for this purpose, he instructs them in Sharia and in Hikmah. So clearly we can see that these are the 4 categories in which the contents of religion can be divided, and the contents themselves, all of them, the purpose of all these contents is to purify human soul and to purify our individual and collective lives. So as far as these 4 categories are concerned, Ustaz further surmises that as far as the nature of physical cleansing is concerned, the etiquette that we are given, they require nothing in them which would prohibit things on humankind. They are basically positive directives. Similarly, the second category, which is of the worship rituals, again you'll find positive directives in them. It is only in the other 2 categories, so one of them is morals and the other one is something which relates to our edibles. So only things which are prohibited in these 2 categories, they find mention in the Quran. Now in this regard, he says that his stance has been misunderstood. He does not say that only 4 things are prohibited or 5 things are prohibited in religion. What he has actually said, and for this he also quotes that verse of Surah Araf, which we'll just also cite for you, that these things that he has said are prohibited, they just relate to the moral sphere or the ethical sphere. So the allegation on him that he just prohibits 5 things is not correct. the exact statement of his own view in this regard is that 5 things amongst morals and ethics are prohibited. And for this, he cites the particular verse that I'm just going to cite before you of Surah Araf. And also in that surah, or in the context of that surah, you'll find that the edibles are mentioned separately. So whatever is prohibited in our dietary laws is mentioned separately in this verse. And once that is mentioned, it is after their mention that comes up this mention of 5 things which are prohibited. So in order to understand his view, let us now concentrate on the context and the verse of Surah Araf, or the verses of Surah Araf, which are now being displayed before you. Ya bani Adama, khuzu zinatakum inda kulli masjid, wa kulu washrabu, wa la tusrifu, innahu la yuhibbul musrifin. قل من حرم زينة الله التي أخرج لعباده والطيبات من الرزق قل هي للذين آمنوا في الحياة الدنيا خالصة يوم القيامة كذلك نفصل الآيات لقوم يعلمون قل إنما حرم ربي الفواحش ما ظهر منها وما بطن والإثم والبغي بغير الحق وأن تشركوا بالله ما لم ينزل به سلطانا وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون. Children of Adam, come with your adornments at the time of your presence in every mosque, and eat and drink, but do not cross the limits. God does not like those who cross limits. Ask them, O Messenger of God, who has forbidden you the adornments of the Almighty, which He had created for His servants, and who has forbidden the wholesome among the edibles? Tell them, they are for the believers also, even in this world. But God has also given the disbelievers a share in them, and on the day of judgment they shall be for the believers alone. The disbelievers shall have no share in them. Thus do we explain our revelations for those who want to know. Say, my Lord has only forbidden lewd acts, whether open or hidden, and usurping rights, and wrongful oppression, and that you associate with God that for which He had not sent down any sanction, and that you fabricate something about God that you know not. So you see, as far as these verses are concerned, they clearly tell us that as far as the moral affair is concerned, these are the 5 things which are prohibited. And you can see the previous verse which tells us, وَالطَّيِّبَاتِ مِنَ الرِّزْقِ, that all pure things, all wholesome things are allowed for the believers. So in other words, these are the 5 areas in which Ustaz has pointed out that the Quran only prohibits. And we know from the study of these verses that they relate to the moral affair only. So if someone has to object to his view, he has to come up with a different objection, because as far as his own view is concerned, he is not telling us that only 5 things are prohibited in religion in any way. What he is telling us is 5 things amongst morals are prohibited. And these 5 things, viewers, can be categorized. They are categories in themselves. And so therefore, when his associate Hassan Ilyas, he asked him that there are people who bring up many other things which are mentioned in Quran and Hadith, which seemingly prohibit something else. So his answer was that if he enlists all these things, he will reply and tell them that all of these prohibited things will either relate to one of these 5 categories or will belong to something else which is outside the ambit of these 5 things, and that of course would be the ambit of dietary Sharia. So all in all, we can see that the 4 categories of religion, the 4 contents, which of course is the moral affair, the dietary affair, the worship affair, or the hygienic affair, all these 4 categories. In this regard, what he has said is that the Quran, or these verses of the Quran that he has referred to, just refer to the moral part of these directives. So now I'm now also going to give you a few examples which were given to him, which were presented before him, and he categorized all those examples within one of these 5 areas. So let us now look at some of the examples which were presented against his point of view and which seemingly say that there are other things prohibited besides these 5 things. So the first example that was presented before him was that of riba, or interest. So he answered this objection by saying that basically this is baghi bi ghair al-haq, or wrongful oppression. because this is something in which you usurp the wealth of some other person. It is not an independent prohibition. It once again falls under baghi bighair al-haq, which is wrongful oppression. Then the second example that was presented before him was that of alcohol. So his reply was that this alcohol is something which does not fall in these five contents or these five categories which are mentioned in this Surah Araf verse. It actually refers to the dietary sharia or edibles which were mentioned prior to this verse as tayyibati min al-rizq. So anything which is not tayyib, which is khabis, which is not wholesome, is regarded to be prohibited. So it does not even fall in these five areas which he has pointed out. The third thing that was presented before him was gambling. So this again is baghi bighair al-haq, which is of course wrongful oppression. So once again we can see that gambling actually falls in this category. The fourth thing was presented before him was ansab. Now ansab, of course, we know that it means that you slaughter an animal in an altar at an altar. So this is shirk. This is polytheism, and which is clearly mentioned as one of the prohibited items in this verse amongst those five categories. Then another thing that was presented was azlam. So azlam, we know, are arrows of gambling, and again, of course, it is part of gambling, and therefore it again should be qualified amongst baghi bighair al-haq, which is wrongful oppression. Then another thing that was presented before him, or another category, was the 14 categories of prohibited relationships. So clearly the Quran itself has called it as fahisha. And we know that this verse in which we are just studying, the Surah Araf verse, we know it says all fahisha or all lewd acts, whether open and forbidden, are prohibited. So these 14 relations which are prohibited for marriage, we know that they are mentioned, where they are mentioned in Surah Nisa. The words are innahu kana fahishatan wa maqta, which means that these are lewd acts. So in fact, we can say that these 14 relationships, they also fall in one of these five categories, in which is fahisha. So another category that was presented before him was wrongful measuring of items. For example, measuring and weighing things which are mentioned in the Quran that should abstain from in a wrongful way. So his answer once again was that this falls under the category of baghi bighair al-haq, which means wrongful oppression. So remember, what we are doing is that we are trying to see that how these prohibited items fall under one of these five categories. The next thing that was presented before him was ghiba, or backbiting. Now, backbiting is again something which is baghi against izzat, or respect, or honor. So when we say baghi bighair al-haq, it actually refers to something which falls against one's self-honor. So when a person commits ghiba, or when he does backbiting or she does backbiting, then she or he is indulging against wrongful oppression of a person's personal respect. Now, another thing that was presented before him was murder. Now, murder, as we can clearly see, is once again baghi bighair al-haq. It is actually wrongful oppression, which means that you are taking the life of a person without any right. So it falls under wrongful oppression. So these were some of the things which are found in the Quran, and they actually fall in the category of either wrongful oppression, or they form under the category of religious innovation, which is an taqulu Allahi ma la ta'lamun, or they are baghi bighair al-haq, or they are ism, or they are wrongful oppression. So these five categories which are mentioned in this verse are the ones which actually encompass all these prohibitions. Now, another example that was given to him, or some other examples I can say, was from hadith literature, and from them we can see one of them was that animals or birds which have claws or which have carnassial teeth. So again, this example does not fit into these five categories. It actually relates to edibles, which have already been discussed separately as tayyibat min al-rizq, that only edibles which are tayyibat, only edibles which are wholesome are allowed. So therefore, they can also not fall in these five categories. Similarly, some more examples that were given to him from hadith literature was the prohibition of gold and of the prohibition of silk. So again, his answer was that this is basically gold and silk. The reason that they are prohibited is arrogance, because once a person dons these things which are a means of show off, they are an expression of one's arrogance. And this arrogance itself is again a baghi, It's wrongful oppression against the honor of other people. So therefore, this also falls in those 5 categories which have been mentioned. So in the end, let me just surmise that the 5 categories which the Surah Araf verse mentions refers to just morals, things which are prohibited in the moral sphere. And when Ustaz says that only 5 things are prohibited, it is not that he is saying that only 5 things in all of religion are prohibited. What he is saying is that only 5 things in the moral sphere are prohibited. These 5 things, if I summarize from this verse of Surah Araf, they are: number 1, lewd acts, fahisha, and whether they are open or hidden. Second is ism, or usurping rights. Third is baghi bighair al-haq, or wrongful oppression. Fourth is to ascribe to God something He did not send down. And fifth, of course, this fourth is referring to religious innovation or bid'ah. And the fifth is that you fabricate something about God that you know not, which of course relates to shirk. So these are the 5 things which are prohibited in the moral sphere, and that is what he has said. Other than that, things which are prohibited in the dietary sphere, they are mentioned separately in these verses of Surah Araf. And the other 2 contents of religion, the first being the worship ritual sphere, and the second being physical hygiene. These 2 spheres, they do not contain any prohibition. They basically contain positive directives. So if his whole viewpoint is understood, this misconception that he regards only 5 things to be prohibited should not arise. He regards these 5 things as categories of moral nature which are prohibited.